Thank you. And yes, today I'll be talking about the Latin text of Codex Boernerianus. So a something a little different, I suppose, than what's come up earlier. Codex Boernerianus is a bilingual manuscript of the Pauline epistles from the mid-9th century, which has been associated with St. Gall Monastery. And this manuscript has a very unusual layout, as you can see here. Written in a single Greek column with an interlinear Latin text. You can see it image closely here. You can see the larger Greek text is denoted by the green arrows, with the smaller Latin text above it denoted by the blue arrows. Over the last several centuries, much has been written about the Latin text, the Codex Boernerianus, as scholars have suggested a variety of theories regarding the nature and purpose of the Latin text. Well, some have noted its close relationship to the Old Latin tradition, obviously here. Others have noted commonalities with Vulgate tradition. Some have posited that it is simply a translation of the Greek text of Boernerianus, created by the copyist during the production process. Keep up with my slides here. While others treat it as if it were copied from an exemplar, but almost at the same time. Maybe a few words at a time in Greek, a few words at a time in Latin. So both being copied not simultaneously, but close, I suppose. It has also been suggested that the Latin text was expanded later. This has been suggested by Freda, Cloa, Houghton, and others. These scholars have also noted that it might have had a pedagogical function for those studying Greek, noting that there are often multiple alternate Latin readings given to correspond to a single Greek word, along with grammatical notes also embedded in the text. And I want to take a moment to say that from now on, I'm just going to refer to the Latin text of Codex Boernerianus as VL77, and the Greek text is O12, okay? For this paper, first we're going to look at some of the glosses in the Latin text and consider the scribe's own competency in the Greek language. And then we're going to look categorically at the varying ways in which a Latin text appears to have been accommodated to match the Greek text, focusing specifically on one category. First, before we get to the glosses, we need to talk about the scribe's Greek competency. In the past, the scribe's own competency in Greek has been questioned for very clear and obvious reasons. O12 is riddled with misspellings, incorrect word divisions, even readings that look like complete gibberish. So one conclusion drawn is that the scribe didn't know Greek. However, there are some other phenomena within the manuscript that tell a different story. And some of these phenomena are in the manuscript's Latin text. There are certain glosses embedded in VL77 that might help us establish how competent the scribe was in Greek. And these glosses that we're now going to look at function as clarifying notes for the Latin and Greek text. So in Romans 5:6, and I'm going to use the images of the manuscript when ones that I think are clear enough. Otherwise, I'm going to rely on the facsimile here. That's the facsimile. The Vulgate reading, which is also attested by most of the Latin tradition, is cum ad hoc infirmi essemus, while we were still weak. Now, VL77 has something a little different. Okay. Consistentibus id es participialis nobis infirmus ad hoc, which matches its Greek text, O12, onton, himon, astenon, eti, that's eti at the end, by the way, with some iticisms. There's nothing special about this Greek text apart from the iticism in eti, and the fact that most Greek manuscripts omit it. But I want to turn your attention to consistentibus nobis, which finds its counterpart in cum essimus in most of the Latin tradition. This syntax of the Latin text in VL 77 matches the Greek syntax, not only in the use of the participle, but also in the ablative absolute construction matching the genitive absolute. This ablative absolute is also attested by VL 78, right, the Latin text of Galatians. But VL 77 also adds something further. Next to consistentibus, which has been written above on tome, the scribe is written id est participialis. This note is clarifying this Latin word stands as a participle, a grammatical help to the reader. There are some other examples of clarifying notes within the Latin text. In Romans 3:13, a note communicating that a construction is in the genitive case. In Romans 4:12, a dative case. Romans 6:10, another notation about a dative noun. And in Romans 8:5, an indicative Latin verb communicating that the Greek counterpart verb is a participle. Right? Galatians 1:14, there's a note clarifying lexeme. By the way, Clark's presentation yesterday, we saw this with tout estin, right, in Greek, just id est, i.e. Okay. Sorry, that was supposed to be, there we go. Another clarifying note about a lexeme. Another note about a participle. It offers the participle and then says that it is the reading that you might expect in the text. Another grammatical help here. Okay. Another case. Right. Here is one that tells us that the verb is to be an infinitive, and it's said twice, and it looks like one is stated as an infinitive for the Greek, and the other one is an infinitive for the Latin text. Again, this is a sampling. It's not an exhaustive list, and I'll give you some more specific numbers toward the end of my presentation. And this is nothing new either. You can find these glosses noted in the Paul transcriptions. Right? There are some great transcription notes in Romans, which were transcribed by Christina Kreinecker, proofread by Hugh Houghton, and this information is there. But if the scribe is able to offer these glosses, providing grammatical and lexical aids which relate the Latin and Greek texts to one another, that is consistent with a scribe who has some familiarity with Greek. I now want to move to how the Latin text of Boernerianus, VL 77, seems to have been accommodated to match its corresponding Greek text, O12. And I'm going to outline some categories and give some examples of corresponding singular Latin readings in VL 77. I want to note that this might be unusual, but the Greek text that I'm going to be looking at here from Boernerianus, these are Greek readings that do agree with most of the Greek tradition, right? By design, okay? Especially, thinking about in light of the last presentation, some of that interplay between the Latin and the Greek text that happens a lot in Boernerianus as well. But I want to isolate those where we can be confident that it's a Latin text that's being accommodated, not the Greek text. Okay. So the text of VL 77 appears to have been accommodated toward the Greek text of O12 through word addition and absence, prefixes, noun cases, verb mood, tense or voice, or I should add person. The example I gave a little bit later is difference in person, the reconstruction of full phrases, and by rendering relative clauses as participles. And there are other instances as well, but these appear to be the major categories. And I'm going to give just a few examples within the first 5 categories, but I want to focus on the participles. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this category, but here is one example in which a Latin word is absent in a way that is consistent with the Greek text of O12. In Ephesians 6:22, rather than quais circa nos sunt et, the things which are concerning us also, VL77 has omitted sunt. Okay? And this aligns with the Greek reading, in which there is no to be verb. So there's no coordinating Latin word. There are exceptions to this, but this kind of accommodation does happen regularly in VL77. Also, while I've identified these categories, I'm still working on enumerating them, and there's going to be more examples of word addition in a few minutes as well. But most of those additions take place in larger whole phrase reconstruction. Prefixes. This also appears to be pretty common. Here's an example from Romans 3:3. Rather than non crediderant, they have not believed, VL77 negates the verb with a prefix, rather than an adverb. And this, of course, matches the Greek text, right? Which does the same. Again, it resembles the Greek text. Example about noun case. Ephesians 1:20, there's a case change as a result in a prepositional phrase change. And this, again, is why some of the categories are kind of difficult to figure out and difficult to enumerate, because this could be considered, right, a phrasal change, but also a case change. Anyway, when there is a change in preposition, that also could mean a change for the governing case. So here, rather than ad dexterum suam, VL77 has in dextera sua, which looks a lot like its Greek text in both preposition and case. Indexia autou. However, the third Latin word sua remains a possessive adjective rendered in the governing case. Meanwhile, the corresponding Greek word tau is a personal pronoun in the genitive case. So it still isn't exact, but it's a lot closer. Here's one: verb, mood, tense, voice, or in this case, person. Okay. 1 Timothy 1:11. Rather than in quod creditum est mihi, okay, which has been entrusted to me, VL77 has quod creditus sum ego. So the person changes from the third to the first person. Which, or it, I have been entrusted, right? Which I have been entrusted, or I have been entrusted it. This is aligned with a standard Greek reading. And therefore, the corresponding pronouns have also been changed. The word quad here, of course, can function in either one, right? Because it's neuter. Okay, phrasal changes. This is kind of the big one here, leading up to the participles. In Romans 4:11, well, the Latin tradition has ut sit pater, that he would be his father. VL77 has in consistindo eum patrum, okay, which goes along with eis ta ene auton patera. Okay, the in matches with the eis, right? So rather than ut plus the subjunctive verb, we've got in plus a gerund in Latin, VL77. Okay. And this happens often, that you see in corresponding with eis to. Right. In Galatians 5:3, here's your standard Latin reading. VL77, you can see, also makes a similar change. The Latin gerund modifying the noun has been transformed into an infinitive governing an accusative noun, just like what we see in the Greek text. Here's an interesting set here. Romans 12:2, you can see the Latin tradition. This is a basic negative command. Okay, do not be conformed with the use of nolo. Here, VL77 changes it to a nay, right? which matches may in O12. It's interesting, the endings of the Greek text are important here. So pay attention to the alpha iota at the end. It happens again in 12:14, right? Alpha iota, and here in verse 12:2, that ending is attested by several other Greek manuscripts. Now, what's happened is the scribe has matched ne to may, and then opts for a subjunctive verb rather than the infinitive to complete the construction. I say that because I would posit that those are probably supposed to be epsilons, right, rather than alpha iota. You see it in another example here. Again, this is a very common iticism in this manuscript. We saw it with eti already, but here the scribe in Galatians 6:7 gives the option of nolite errare versus vel ne errate, or vel ne errate is just the or. And again, you have this alpha iota, which clearly is supposed to be an epsilon, or at least the scribe seems to think so. Participles. You could categorize this as a form of phrase reconstruction, but it's kind of its own category here. At least it needs to be. Here's just an example of how this works. You get a participle in the Greek text and therefore a corresponding participle in the Latin text. Give you another one. Relative clause in the Latin tradition, but a participle in VL 77. Very, very typical here. Again, this is interesting. In Ephesians 1:11, this is it even reflects the case, right? So not only is the scribe making changes, or it appears to be, the text is accommodated. We can talk about whether this is the scribe or whether this was in the exemplar or something, but I think the scribe is capable of doing this, but even able to match the case. The opposite does occur as well. Here's an example. This reading in Greek, though, is attested by O12. It's also in O10, right? But I don't think it's attested anywhere else. But you can see the move from a participle to a relative clause. And I'm not going to talk about each one, but you can see these are the examples of singular readings in Romans, just riddled with them. Oops. Okay. This is a regular occurrence in this manuscript. The alternate readings are also worth considering because they offer some insight into the scribe's competency in Greek. Specifically here, it's worthwhile to note how some of the instances with alternate readings deal with these participles and relative clauses. Okay, so here's an alternate reading. Latin tradition says qui sunt. VL 77 has qui sunt or substantivus. And again, twice usin, and again, a match even with the case as well. This is right at the beginning of the manuscript, so it's not like it's something that the scribe decided at some point to do. It seems to have been built into the production of the manuscript. Here's another, Romans 4:17, qui vificat. And VL 77 gives you vificanti, vel qui vificat, right, or qui vificat. And you can see in the Greek, again, it matches. Okay. This is an interesting one. Here, the Latin tradition, cognovicent, and the scribe just says cognovicent or a participle. I don't know. I mean, this is pretty early on. I don't know. Maybe the scribe gave up. you know, on a pluperfect or something. But there it is. Here's a more creative example, and I'm coming close to the end here. In Ephesians 4:18, qui est in the Latin tradition. Ten o son. You can see with to be verbs, it's very common with to be verbs. And here's a picture of the manuscript and a picture of the facsimile. And the Greek text is usi tantem. Now, if you look this verb up in the lexicon, you might not find it. Though the dictionary entry usi tans does appear in a glossary of later Latin to 600 AD, compiled by Alexander Sauter. And the entry for usi tans gives the Greek equivalent on usa, and then the meaning, which is or exists, and then states where it appears. Where does it appear? In Codex Boernerianus, in 2 Corinthians 1, Ephesians 4, and Philippians 1. In Philippians 1, it actually is a part of a bell reading. Okay? The Vetus Latina edition of Ephesians also has a note saying that this could be the scribe's own attempt to render this technical theological term usia. So the scribe Boernerianus has gone above and beyond here in accommodating the Latin text toward the Greek. Okay? Now, I don't want to give you the impression that this is all that happens. There are plenty of places where that's not the case. Right? The scribe does not do this for every single reading. I'm going to give you some numbers here in a second. You can see this right here. Although this might be a bad example because qui eudicas does line up very nicely with ho krinon, right? So that's probably not the best example. So how common is this for VL77 to seemingly accommodate to match O12? And before I go on, I have to say that I'm so thankful for those who have transcribed these manuscripts, who are behind the Vetus Latina editions, who produced the Principal Pauline epistles. I think many of us know how much work goes into those things, or don't know how much work. I don't really know how much work goes into those things. I can't even imagine. But yeah, thank you. Romans and Galatians, that we're going to look at just really quickly. I'm just going to put all the accommodated texts as a whole here. There's 854 differences between the Vulgate and VL77 in Romans, 340 in Galatians, 202 have alternate readings in Romans, 76 in Galatians, 146 singular readings consistent with O12. Okay. 53 in Galatians, there's 11 glosses in Romans, and 7 glosses in Galatians. So the Latin text of VL77 itself is not some ad hoc translation. There's plenty more agreement with other Latin witnesses, but a significant portion of it does seem to have accommodated to match O12. So to conclude here, the glosses embedded in the Latin text and alternate readings of VL77, which are consistent with the Greek text of O12, seem to show that the scribe of Boernerianus had some competence in Greek. Therefore, it seems to be possible that the scribe did have the ability in Greek to accommodate at some level the Latin text to match the Greek text. And those singular Latin readings of VL77, which are consistent with the Greek readings of O12, are best explained as VL77 having been accommodated to match O12. Now, whether the readings or a portion of them were accommodated by the scribe or had already been accommodated in the Latin exemplar, I mean, that's another question. But the scribe seems to have been capable of doing this. So there are some questions to further explore. If the scribe Boernerianus did accommodate the readings in the Latin text, why some but not others? And are the accommodations consistent through the entire manuscript? And for those questions to be answered, further studies needed. Thank you.
Time for one short question, I'm afraid. We've got anyone? Yeah, Oliver?
Yes. Alec, thank you very much for your paper. One of your examples, the alternative reads in before the bell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very common.
Any idea why?
I don't know. I've got spreadsheets with these and the order of each one and which other, Vetus Latina manuscripts are consistent with, and I've not figured that out. That is a regular occurrence. Regular occurrence. And some of those glosses also come right before the word, and it looks like it was added later, you know, but maybe by the scribe, but just kind of an addition, like not planned. So no, I don't know why, but it's very consistent for areas.
That's lovely. Good old thank Alec again.